Ooh.
I like how Emily never knows exactly when we're live.
No, I don't know
Like
if the timing was right.
I count down and then she just like does a tentative hand gesture. Like, do people see this? Am I trapped in a cone of silence? Am I communicating with the outside world? Anyway,
Yeah.
we are back after
Woo!
2 weeks of not being back, and I didn't even tweet about us not doing an episode last week, so you guys are
Yeah,
probably like,
sorry. That was my bad. I was at home and then I had to do an entire like very important errand day that I can't talk about yet, but
yay.
people will probably be able to figure it out very soon. So
We are sober rock indeed. Also, you know, important. I have given up trying to add emotion to my voice. You know, a lot of people point out that I don't have it. I've just decided because I was watching like some Chomsky interviews and he said like the best rhetoric is no rhetoric, meaning that you shouldn't like add emotion and try to persuade people of things when you're making an argument. You should just like present the information and let them decide for themselves. So, you know, obviously I'm just the best public speaker there ever was. So I'm just gonna not improve and stay the way I am. That is my life update. But we are going to talk about things that you guys care about more, which is that we have a lot of roster change rumors already starting up behind the scenes, and then also some have slipped into the public as they inevitably do. Have you gotten a chance, or like how familiar are you with Thanatos? Because I watched like a lot of his VODs, some on stream, some elsewhere.
yeah, I've watched a bunch of his LCK Challengers stuff. I haven't watched any solo queue VODs. Why is the dog apparently does not like C9 Thanatos? The big thing with my experience with him is it pretty much solely comes from DK challengers and not anything super recent. Because as people probably know, there were a lot of rumors that I'm not going to necessarily address here because people have said like they may be true, they may be not true, who knows, but he basically was not on a team despite performing really, really well. He was part of a DK Challengers top side that also included Lucid, who was promoted recently to LCK, and we've talked about him at length. Both his positives and his kind of like rookie mistakes that he's made in LCK. And then Polbey, who had a really good start, kind of fell off, but that was kind of the driving force behind the success of Damwon Challengers last year. I think if people want like kind of my opinion of Thanatos, I think there have been a bunch of other, I know like Brendan, who is on IMT, former FlyQuest analyst, did a whole like rundown. I think Thanatos will, if he does end up on C9, come in and do really well. But I also think one thing that is pretty interesting in terms of how he could look is, like I said, the reason why I pointed out this DK topside as a whole. So Thanatos, Lucid, Polbey, to reiterate. I think the way that they played around Thanatos, and specifically the way that Lucid would play for Thanatos, because he was such a like carry force for that team at times, and also could be pretty flexible in his champion pool as well. I don't want to make it so that he's like oh, he could only play carries. Like most famously, he pulled out the Malphite a lot for the team. But I think the most interesting thing to me in the way that C9 can play around him is that it could end up looking a lot like when people remember Fudge really started to come into his own during his rookie season towards the end of that spring, where they would just stack waves topside and then Blabber would show up and they would play through top lane a lot more. I think you could see a similar strategy around Thanatos should he join C9. And it would look very similar, making him kind of a primary carry and having Berserker play weak side not in terms of champion picks, but weak side in terms of little jungle attention, if that makes sense. So if you're asking me like how he might fit on this team, that's I think the most likely play style that you might end up seeing. But I think like a lot of prospects, he's incredibly talented. Coming in, I think he'll probably do very well, at least initially, and then we'll see what that means for like the team as a whole, because you and I have talked about this at length, where the problem, and obviously Fudge was kind of the lightning rod for a lot of C9's criticism, but I maintain that the problem with this roster and their lack of team synergy is not necessarily going to be solved by simply replacing Fudge with a better top laner.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the biggest thing is I'm way lower on him than I think a lot of people are. We did a VOD review on stream if you guys want to watch VOD like the other day. I don't think he's bad by any means. I just think he's fine, right? Like, we watched a bunch of his games, and I think and then I watched a bunch of games off stream, and I think there were maybe like out of 10 games, there were maybe like 3 moments where I was like, damn, that's really good, right? Which I expected there to be a higher frequency of those. For someone we're going to import, I think he'll do decently well in lane. Like there were a lot of times where I had questions on like his rumble and all these things. By far, his best champ was Gnar. I was like, okay, so we're importing Summit again, sick. And then he'll be good. Like C9 found another Summit, excellent. But I think the main thing for me is that the biggest problem is if I look at that team, I think the way you're structuring your mid game is your biggest issue in terms of macro and playing the map. And changing top doesn't really fix that, right? It's changing jungle, mid, or support will probably fix their process better, like completely redoing or revamping the team from that perspective. Those roles are arguably harder to replace. I feel like right now there's just like a lot of good tops, both like in NA and out of NA, right? And it's just like crazy to me that that's the role that they're changing. I know Fudge received a lot of criticism, but for me, it's like if we're importing this role, then I don't know. Like I'm just always concerned, like you know the Travis Gafford analogy of like take one for a year or half a year and then throw the back.
Oh yeah.
Right? This kind of thing. That's kind of how it feels because it just feels very like I don't know. It's weird because it feels like it's almost more lucrative to import a player because other teams are more likely to be interested in an import. So they will buy out an import player. So from that perspective, it's a better investment, right? I don't know. That's like how I feel about it sometimes. I'm very cynical at this point. So that, I mean, I don't think he'll do that badly, right? Like, I think he'll be fine. But the problem is that I think there are a lot of fine top laners in the league. And it doesn't fix C9's in the domestically, and it doesn't fix C9's problems. The other element of it that, I mean, like, obviously I'm shouting out my boy Surdy, who said that, like, when there was he said on stream that when there was a tryout, or when, like, they heard that Fudge might be getting replaced, or maybe C9 were maybe looking for top laners, looking at top lane options, Andrew sent, like, recorded VODs of him subbing into FlyQuest versus C9 scribs and solo killing Fudge in both sides of the matchup, and you know he didn't get the job. So, but I mean these are I mean it's just like very weird to me because it feels like the takeaway from TL, which we talked about before, wasn't necessarily promote internally and have a better roster. It was the more Koreans you have, the more likely you are to win LCS. It's kind of how it felt. And a lot of other rumors I've heard behind the scenes seem to affirm that, so we'll see how it goes.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of play style, I think the thing I'd want to stress is that like I think the best case scenario is you see something like what the team did to kind of get again Fudge online when he was performing really, really well at the beginning of 2021. not the beginning of 2021. He was not good then. How he improved over the split, and then how they ended up winning finals, right? Which is like just diving on stacking waves top and getting him ahead. I can see that becoming their default like early game with Blabber pathing top and Berserker being really comfortable in 2v2. I also think best case scenario, obviously, C9 is probably hoping you have another Berserker, right? Where it's like he's either going to stay with the team and perform really, really well, or like to kind of to your point, they would be able to give him to another LCS team if he performs well. So we'll see. Yeah. I think he's good.
We'll see. I mean, I think
it sounds like I'm a little higher on him than you are.
I mean, I guess the issue was like,
but I don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, I don't disagree with your context, if that makes sense. Like, I don't disagree with the context of looking at what we already have here.
Yeah, I mean, the other element of it, because like chat's talking about how scrims were not productive because like someone was not taking it seriously, but that's like, I feel like in terms of if you ask players who that was, Fudge is almost never the answer. So I don't really know why like Fudge would be associated with this. Like, and that's what I assume is going to be the takeaway from this, is that like Fudge was the reason why scrims weren't productive. But from my understanding, that was not the case at all. You know, it's just like sometimes you get super excited or whatever. And even if you watch the content that came out, Berserker doesn't get mad at Fudge; he gets mad at someone else on the team. Yeah, I'm not gonna make it explicit for you because I don't want to like start more bad mouthing of random players. But the thing is, like, I don't think that having like changing top lane fixes your scrim culture either, right? That's the big thing. I think what is more likely to maybe help your scrim culture, if possible, is like the coach change. Not that I think it would have been Mithy's fault if the culture was bad, but it's like maybe a hard reset, something to do. Like sometimes if players are winning all the time or if scrims seem really easy, it's really hard to fix the culture back to be like, okay, now we're knuckling down when things start going wrong, right? Like if the culture doesn't start out serious, then sometimes it's hard to make it go back. So I feel like if that's your biggest problem, then roster change, coach change. Maybe coach change is fair because you should start out with like a serious culture. You should be able to maintain that culture even if even if you're winning everything, right? You should still have players feel dedicated. You should still be able to make players like understand that they have to give their 100% to scrims every single day. So I think that might be a fair thing to look at. They could also be going with a Korean top because they have Reapered, and Reapered wants to work with Thanatos because they already announced that Reapered's coming back officially. So I mean, there's all of these elements of it, but the other element of insight that I can provide is that obviously JoJo worked a lot with Impact, and to him it's very important that you have a top laner who's willing to communicate about side lanes. Again, I don't know if Thanatos is that person because I watched the games he played, and it wasn't like their team was like playing really perfect macro side lane push rotation games or anything like that, right? So that's like another call out, I guess, that I can give. So we'll see.
Yep. I'm curious because again, I was out of it because I was home watching games in between family stuff. But what are the other, because I know up next on the list are other roster rumors. What are the other roster rumors? Because I have actually no clue. And I wasn't expecting many roster changes for NA or EU in between like these seasons.
So I know there will be coach changes, like that's confirmed. I heard that there is going to be more roster changes. But nothing has kind of like leaked yet. So if chat had questions, this was like more or less to ask the question like, what does chat think about Like
does
potential
chat think?
roster rumors, or if chat has any questions. Obviously, the Weibo Tarzan,
Oh,
Weibo
yeah.
Breathe roster rumor came out. That's another one. So yeah.
Yeah, I saw that, and I thought that was pretty interesting, considering the fact that previously Tarzan's name had been linked to go to DK, and they were going to not go with Lucid anymore. I know that was also a rumor, so
yeah.
But
I
yeah.
mean, I don't know if I heard that as like an official rumor. You might have heard that more than I did.
It wasn't an official rumor, more like a combination rumor / wishful thinking on the part of some people, and please God, no, don't yeet Lucid out of this team. It is not his fault, from other people. So like I think it was just more of it was less of a rumor that was going to be true and more of a like talking point for what should this DK roster do going forward now that they're out of LCK playoffs.
Yeah, I think for me the Tarzan thing is interesting because I think someone asked me this, like one of the Spanish commentators asked me about it, and so I tried to. Why is your? Okay, it's fine. There was another emote popping up on Discord.
Wait, why? What is he doing? I didn't even move.
I know, it was amazing. Anyway, the reason someone asked me about this, like one of the Spanish commentators asked me the thoughts of this, so I tried to reply in Spanish, but it was like, in more detail, I would say that like Weibo actually play a very funny way of playing, where it's like they're so afraid they will not take like even numbered fights for the most part. Like it seems like at all costs they try to avoid even numbered fights, and they just try to play like maps. So you can always tell from draft if they have a chance to win or not. It's like, do they have two winning side lanes? Yes. Okay, can win. Do they have two winning side lanes? No. Okay, go next. Because they'll play like for pressure on one side and then try to get like a pick and then try to contest. I remember there was that one game where they were up 10k gold and just like full on refused to 5v5. That was a fun one. So I was like, huh. Will Tarzan and Breathe fit with this team? I feel like Breathe doesn't have like insane killer instinct, but I still had him in my all pro because I felt like he played fights like very well, right? He played like kind of along with what the team was playing for RNG, which was not good, but he like always did well in his like decently well in his lane, and he always like mechanically played decently well in fights, right? Like he didn't have really a bad game to split, so Breathe would probably do decently well, right? He's worked with Xiaohu before. They've done that kind of map setup before. And then you have Tarzan, who will like just full clear if you let him. So the fact that the team is like somewhat fight averse is fine. So I feel like it's like a fine change, right? Like it ends up working towards how they want to play anyway. So from that perspective, it's good. Do I think it'll make them like an insane team? Maybe, like, who knows? I felt like ZDZ actually was the best player on the team in playoffs, like, best performer, if that makes sense. Like, he had a lot of games where if ZDZ doesn't start the fights or if ZDZ doesn't make a certain play, they will lose. So it's interesting to me that they're replacing top jungle from that perspective, but I don't think the changes don't make sense, right? I think the changes make sense with what the roster is doing or how the team plays, so it's fine.
I think also, I mean, it's also going to depend on. I thought Xiaohu had like a really, really rough split. So you also have to have the rest of the team within that context kind of step up and perform better.
Okay. Well, if Chad hasn't asked about any other roster rumors, I think we'll probably have more by next week if I am correct. So we'll revisit then.
I've actually literally heard nothing, so
Nice.
I'm very curious. I'm ready to be surprised.
Cool. All right. The next topic that I have on the list, coincidentally, Ian is also asking about it in chat, which is lane swaps. More or less, what do we think? Are they good for the game? Are they bad for the game? And why are they coming back now of all times? Are kind of the main questions people will ask.
Do we want to do, like, since you and I have been around for forever, do we want to do like a brief
history?
I don't know if history of lane swaps is necessarily like accurate, but like previously, I do want to address why lane swaps evolved, just because as a strategy, just because and like I think it's weird because when people think lane swaps, I think in their minds they literally just have season 6 in their heads, where at that time a lot of people had optimized it to the point where it was quote unquote boring. I mean, I'm a lane swap enthusiast, so like you're never gonna get me on that one. But I think the big thing is like lane swaps from their initial iteration have gone through like 2v1, 3v1, 4v0, like jungle follow with top laner, fast push all the way to like tier 2 and then freeze the wave. I don't know if people remember that, but that was certainly a time. And typically it was either to like completely fuck over the enemy top side, which is when you would see those like super deep freezes. I'm bringing this up just because I haven't seen a lot of people talk about this when they talk about lane swaps and like why you would do it. And then additionally, obviously avoiding a disadvantageous bot 2v2. So if you have a hyper carry that you don't want to put into a 2v2 lane, you can get them more golden resources by picking them in the draft anyway into a losing lane even, and then swapping out of it. I think the big thing that was that I've also seen people confuse, so I just want to clear up because people are like, why did lane swaps stop happening? And the reason is because, and by the way, I will forever hate this timing. I think this flew under the radar as like everyone thinks of like season 5 worlds, right? As like, oh man, this big patch came out and we had Mordekaiser Drake and we had GP being disabled for lore reasons previously that year. And we had like all of these random buggy things that were going on. We had the Gragas being disabled mid-tournament. It was a shit show. And I feel like one thing that flies under the radar is the very next year during playoffs, patch 615 hits and they change turret fortification, basically eradicating lane swaps and making it really difficult to do them because they removed turret fortification on bot side and kept it on mid and top. So basically, if you swap, it's going to be really difficult to do an even swap, and it will be disadvantageous to do it. And they also added turret first blood here as well. So it basically meant that like if you couldn't race your opponent that was swapping top because they had turret fortification and you on bot side did not, then bot side would always win. Therefore eradicating lane swaps. The reason why I think they're back now, I don't think so. This is a really interesting discussion for me because I don't necessarily think that this should be a strategy that is employed all the time or is optimal even most of the time. I think it's optimal with certain compositions where, again, either you want to do well for a hyper carry while also simultaneously, I think, really trying to fuck over the enemy top. I think, like, for example, I really liked it in HLE T1 specifically because of context. Uh, and I don't even necessarily think that they're like, obviously HLE kind of nearly biffs it in the mid game. Um, but this is in their second series, right? So the series that they played more recently. Um, they basically swap against TF top while Kumayushi is playing Zeri. And so the risk is you are going to give Zeri kind of a free lane, right, on bot side, because you're swapping away from it, and you're swapping up to kind of fuck over the TF top. But the context of the fact that Guma previously had not looked super comfortable on the Zeri and they hadn't looked super comfortable playing with him on Zeri is important. And it's also important that I thought it was really interesting that they basically do at 4 minutes, Doran is level 4 and Zeus is still level 1. I believe he has no CS at the time. And then they swap Varus back at 5 minutes to bot lane to get first Drake, and that's when things kind of start to even out, but it's still not even at all because essentially HLE end up with push in top because Doran is able to bully the TF completely out of lane as Cassante. And then they also have the push on bot because their support is ahead of Keria, who I think is still like level 2 at the time. I thought it was a really good execution within context of like why you would want to swap to get your lanes ahead, and even like more importantly, I think recognize that this is not necessarily a style that T1 play a lot through like this kind of like TF top. Obviously, like later we would see Zeus bring out the Vayne top, and it looked really, really good as well. But kind of recognizing that this might not be a style that T1 is necessarily comfortable playing with. It's a good time to put ourselves in an advantageous position. That was kind of, I think, one of my favorite iterations of it. I also think a really important component to a lot of the more successful iterations of this has been having Jinx as your AD specifically, because of what she can do against turrets. But if you're asking me if this is like an optimal strategy across the board, I actually don't necessarily think it is. And I think we've already seen that in terms of how these lane swaps have been executed.
So I actually think it is optimal right now.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
If you've noticed, so obviously the 6.15 patch, if you pay attention to what was changed there, it made lane swaps very bad. One, it was pre-turret plates, so it was a lot easier to kill turrets quickly. Two, the first turret bonus gold, you could get like a total of 1k gold, basically extra, as far as I remember. It was like 400 for first blood, and then like the first turret was like 600, so you get like 1,000. So you get 400 bonus gold basically initially for the turret first blood. So it's very easy to do, plus the turret fortification, they dropped turret fortification for bot lane, so it just melted. Within the first 5 minutes. If you've looked at turret changes subsequently, turret first blood bonus is only 150. Now, that's one thing to point out. Another thing to point out is that because they didn't want it to be so easy to take plate, they added plates, but they also, in recent memory, because they didn't want it to be so easy to take plates quickly, they increased fortification like on plates after you take an initial one, for example. So it's harder to just completely blow through, even on bot side, it's hard to just completely blow through that. And it's obviously also increased if you have more members around, which a lot of times in the lane swap situation, you'll have your jungle, you'll be looking for a dive, you'll be looking for these types of things. So if you're getting swapped on and it's like 80 is Jinx's top and she's just like full hitting. So this is why I like the way G2 do it, because it looks like Broken Blade's inting, and then the casters were like making jokes about not negative gaming and all this stuff, but because he would just like sit under a turret and die, but every time he's dying, he's trying to stop the wave. And if you actually watch the G2 games, because their bot lane is solo by themselves hitting turret on top, right? And their top laner is there like hitting wave, they always get it first. They almost always get first turret with their bot lane hitting turret first, without enemy top laner being there, because their enemy top laner and enemy jungler go bot and try to do dives. So even though their top laner dies more, right, they still get first turret, so it ends up being a decent trade. And if you do the math on, let's say you're playing Varus Ashe optimally, like an LPL bot lane playing Varus Ashe. If you watch that shit, they're usually getting 2 kills because they're getting you really low, your jungle's coming bot and you're diving. So they're getting like 700 gold, like if it's first blood, right, from the 2 kills. They're getting an extra plate. It's like 175 gold. They're getting they're having jungle split maps, so you get all of that if you're keeping the lane states the same, right? If you're keeping the lane state 2v2, then it's way worse for you than maybe losing 150 gold because enemy got turret first blood, right? Or enemy killed your top laner once. You're actually in a situation where if you mathematically do it, then optimally, like even if you don't get turret first blood, even if you fall behind in turret, you end up losing less. Especially because we're seeing these like really terrible, like people call them racist bot lanes, like the Draven Ashe, Callista Rumble, like stuff like this is just like unplayable. Like stuff like this that will kill you like without even trying, because they'll just walk forward and press one ability and you'll be half HP, right? And then if you're trying to play something like a Jinx, who Jinx is very strong, but the problem is getting Jinx out of the lane phase, then you are now in a situation where a lane swap is mathematically optimal. Basically because of some of the changes that Riot have made since 6.15 that make lane swaps less punishing, and more forgiving. But
yeah, I guess I still so like G2 had that one again. HLE, I really liked that their initial one against T1, even though it did end up getting dicey with the Zarya later on anyway. I think my big thing is that coming out of the swap, I still think teams don't necessarily know
I agree with that.
how to like use their advantages well, which I guess would then happen with further iteration of it. I do like what you brought up though with getting Broken Blade active, because that's something we even saw in the first iteration of this, which was NIP FPX game 4, where essentially Shanji, I believe there was a time where he was 1-0-2, but he had 0 CS.
Yep.
Just because he was like joining up in whatever like dives or whatever things they wanted to do, and despite not being in lane, right? So like if you are not doing the like super optimized season 6, like we understand this completely with even turret symmetry across both sides, swap, that is a really good viable way of still making sure, and obviously it depends on your top lane champion, right? In that case it was Udyr, in BB's case it was Zac, I think in the best iteration of it, is getting them involved in playmaking instead. Another thing that I do like about the recent lane swaps as well is that they free up supports to roam, which I think has also been a key component of the way the metagame has evolved overall this year. Like even when we saw when you and I were arguing about like Senna versus Smolder, which I think you won that one, by the way. Like hard won that one. But like the idea, right? Like it's not the same as a lane swap, and I'm not equating them, but I do think the way that the metagame evolved from that kind of Senna fast push on top side to get grubs, right? While you'd have your two kind of farming champions in an AD carry and then like a Nautilus sitting in bot lane, was another recognition of what you can do with how you can make the most of grubs, which is now going to be even more important with the changes that actually only support more lane swapping potentially. but then also recognizing that if you don't want to opt into this kind of 2v2 push extravaganza that bot lane has evolved into, especially with support picks, then you can opt to do something else on the map, like, you know, sending your Senna topside, getting grubs, and doing a fast push strategy on turret that way. And it also frees up either your support to farm in that situation, or we saw a lot more support roams going on towards the end of the split. So I think it is also reflected in how people were already starting to see the map and find a workaround for your opponent picking a super hard counter pick into your top side, and also B, getting some sort of hyper carry out of a disastrous laning phase against something like a Varus Ashe lane.
So I think I think first of all, just to be clear, like the NIP FPX situation, FPX Omega griefed that shit like so hard, it was disgusting.
Yeah, they didn't really know what to do.
Actually, the first time they did it was against TT, and TT reacted like a million times better in regular season, which was the first time NIP did a lane swap. Like they basically, like, the problem with the NIP lane swap is that they kind of like slow push the top wave, so their enemy bot lane has time to get the wave all the way in, and support can roam and cover top. It's like actually that easy against NIP in terms of like the way that they do it. It's just that they are very reliant on having like stronger 3v3 topside level 1, so that they like guarantee that they get the swap at least for the first 3 waves, right? And then they seem to really want to dive the enemy top laner like really bad. And I was thinking about this, and I was like talking to, like, shout out to Soul from previous MSW jungler. He was at the Supernova Combines, and, you know, like, the best thing about off-season Combines is you can get random players to do random things in drafts and map strategies, but it was, like, one of the biggest problems right now also with champs like TF and all these things is, like, you have Flash and Ghost, right? And Ghost cooldown is, like, so low. So, if you're just trying to punish the enemy top laner 1v1, they blow Flash once, they blow Ghost once, and then Ghost is back. They go blow Ghost once, they blow Flash once, and then Ghost is back up again. Right? It's just like so obnoxious. So you literally just like have to swap against TF with bot lanes, right? Like things like those types of matchups, it's very, very punishable. So I think that's another thing. Like nerfing Ghost could unironically help, because then those top lane champs will feel less oppressive. The other element of it, I think, is give a little bit, like, decrease bot lane turret fortification, or like make plate gold higher for the first 5 minutes of the game on bot lane. Like, those are probably the best changes. Just like go back. Riot already have the playbook to fix it if they don't want it in the game, right? Like, the most important thing is the 5 minutes. I think grubs are fine, because if you're swapping at like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, like for grubs, I think that's fine. That's like normal gameplay, right? We did it for Rift Herald at like 6:30 before, so it's whatever.
Hey, you also brought up something that has kind of tilted me a little bit in terms of the way that people are talking about this. Like, the idea that a lane assignment is a lane swap is a little specious to me. That's all I'm saying. Like, I think there is a massive difference between a lane swap pre-level 1, or level 1, but like essentially pre-jungle camp spawn, right? Because what you've seen most people doing, as it's kind of evolved a little bit from this, but like initially defensive fan, and then at 50 seconds to a minute, you either recall or you start the swap. And I'm sure we'll probably see some invade wards evolve to be able to counter that and like recognize it. I think we've already started. But like the idea that like a lane assignment strategy for grubs, like the Senna one that I mentioned, or even just rotating your bot lane up to contest for grubs and then using it topside is a lane swap. I don't see it as such. I just see that as like an optimized lane assignment. So yeah, it's weird for me to hear people saying those are like lane swaps as well, because I think the difference in terms of strategy and what you're doing is like very different than saying this is our strategy from level 1 because we want these specific matchups pre-level 6.
I also think it's interesting because, like, in a perfect world, you are swapping back at a certain time, and I think that's also why I like the G2 one, is because they just keep the lane assignment until they get a turret, and then they match. Like, and this is also, like, the most optimal static Shiv Jinx justification in the history of mankind. Is that you get static Shiv on, like, a specific gold value, you have one item, now you're actually, like, winning the 2v2. You know, that's like the static Shiv Jinx justification. Don't build static Shiv on Jinx. Anyway, we're gonna.
But it's so efficient. It feels so good on my hands. Anyway, sorry, I'll shut up.
It's cool. But I think the funniest comments I've seen with people like saying G2's not gonna get away with this against real teams. Oh, you mean like teams that do it in every matchup? Like TS has done it to BLG now. G2, Fnatic have done it. T1 has done it. Also against
HLE has done it.
Also against Gen G. Every single team going to MSI from a so-called like top region has either had it happen to them or done it. You know? So this idea that G2 is not going to get away with it, I think it is just a good strat right now. Like, if you have the Jinx side, you should swap, and you should try to keep, like, G2 are very good at keeping the tempo, and always being, like, the first to initiate the swap, or the situation, and part of that is because Broken Blade just sits in the lane and dies to stall them, right? Like, Broken Blade is legit just, like, stalling them so that G2 can maintain tempo for swaps. So, like, I think that's, I don't know. It is for me, like, definitely an optimal strategy if you're just gonna get railed in lane, right? Like, that's how you have to play it. Yes, Emily does main ADC. You main Vayne, don't you? I seem to recall this. Nice.
Yeah, Vayne. So Vayne is the champ that Vayne and Twitch are actually, for me anyway, maining ADC. This is so off topic, but maining ADC is pretty much like, I don't want to have to think about the game when I play the game.
Nice.
You just kind of get into a rhythm, and for whatever reason, my hands and the rhythm of Vayne, especially after she gets like a tiny bit of attack speed, just feels very good for me to play. Like, the actual mechanics of it just feel very good.
Also makes you my natural mortal enemy as a Cho'Gath main. Anyway,
nice.
That is the champ I ban. As Cho'Gath. Anyway, continuing on. But yeah, I think for me that's the most interesting thing, is that arguably, like, NA teams are the only ones, because of the fact that our finals were so early, like, they kind of missed the, like, lane swap hype. But of course, they'll be scrimming, right? So they'll get practice. And I also think, like, you could even argue that TL were doing lane swaps of some kind, like, for a lot of regular season, to basically avoid situations. It's something the Spawn will for sure be familiar with.
Yeah.
And Nuke Duck, I actually heard this from 100 Thieves last year when Doublelift was doing, like, the, like, pre-10 minute, they were doing, like, the pre-10 minute swaps with, like, Doublelift's Jinx and Zeri in 2023. I heard that was a Nuke Duck thing. So that, like, Nuke Duck basically said, and initiated it and said, let's do this, guys. So ideally, like, in theory, we're sending the best possible NA coaches to adapt to the lane swap meta as well, so we're fine.
Yeah. I mean, also, they just have so much time that there's no way that you don't see this happening and realize that it's going to be a strategy. So, I have no doubt that they'll be practicing it.
Yeah. So it'll be fun. Anyway, lane swaps will happen, guys, because all the teams have practiced it. Yay.
Yeah. It'll probably happen in the LPL Finals this coming weekend.
Exactly. Hate's a big 2. I'm pretty sure like TS will at least try to swap against BLG, like almost guaranteed. Yeah, but anyway, speaking of lane swaps, because I tried to initiate this as like an EU NA thing, transition, bring up NA at the end, you know? I'm very good at this type of thing. No. The EU final happened, and the EU.
It did.
Every time EU plays, I swear I just see like my Twitter is just a wall of EU sucks, which is very.
Yeah, it's very weird. The EU is now the new NA, because since I joined the broadcast, which I think it was happening before I joined the broadcast, but I didn't notice it as much until I was on the broadcast. That was always NA, right? Like NA would play their finals and be like, man, these teams are fucking trash. Like, and now it's EU, and it's very bizarre to me. Anyway,
I think it is a culmination, and it's very funny to me also because obviously when NA had their finals in studio, there were complaints, but it was like known ahead of time, right? Like, we're going to be having the final in the studio. Sucks. Yeah. And then people complained about it. But I swear, like, the outrage at it happening in an EU is like, oh my god, it's just not real. I'm more hyped for XYZ. It's so terrible. And it's like, there's, for some reason, it's just more hip to hate EU right now. I don't know why. I find it very mysterious because when I watch EU game quality, because, like, I tried to prepare for this episode of the show, I wanted to really have like a good memory, so I rewatched the EU final back to back with the NA final, and I was like, I'm gonna be really honest with you. I think the EU game quality is better than the NA game quality still, but I don't know. Maybe that's just G2. Maybe that's. I mean, I don't think it's just caps, even though people have argued that it's just caps. At this point, they've gone from being a one-team region to a one-player region, which is very funny. Yeah, but I don't know. I think it's just like G2's map rotations are just so crisp, and I actually think Fnatic do some things that are very interesting. Like, they will catch mid-wave low and make a fast play on a side lane, which I hardly ever see an NA team do. And I think is actually like weirdly good against Gen G. Do I think that means that they'll beat Gen G in a best of 5? No. Do I think it might make the series more interesting? Yes. So it's like, I don't think Fnatic are trash, right? Like, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that I think are, and then they, of course, they team fight better than G2. That was like a big thing against BDS. I think their team fighting is probably better than TL's team fighting, for example. So, I mean, like, do I think that EU quality is trash? No, I don't think it is, and I just don't know where this is coming from. It's just like this weird echo chamber sentiment right now. So
yeah, I don't know. I think the big thing with the G2 Fnatic final, from my perspective, this doesn't explain why people are calling EU trash, but the most infuriating thing for me regarding Fnatic is that they continuously had themselves in like very good situations to win their games, and then they would make like very obvious mistakes in terms of their actual objective setups, or in terms of their lane assignments, or in terms of someone just getting caught out mid lane for no reason because they're just there and they can get collapsed on. I think whenever, and we've talked about this before when it comes to like individuals, but whenever a team is in so many advantageous positions and then makes very obvious mistakes, I think it's really simple. It's a simple thing to criticize. That's very like easy to see, right? And like very visible. So I think there might be some element of that, because I know like that was my most infuriating part of the finals, and apparently also the dog's most infuriating part.
Yeah. Dog's mad because you're talking shit about Fnatic. Colin's a Fnatic fan, confirmed, I guess.
He's apparently a huge Fnatic fanboy, and he's not happy right now. But like that was the most infuriating part for me, right? Is because I was like, you guys have this.
Yep.
And now you're chucking it away on like very simple and obvious mistakes. So there might be some element of that too. I think when you look at the performance of both, like all 4 teams in finals, I do still think you come away with the fact that G2 have the best understanding of the map and how they want to play with their players, and they should be considered the best Western team right now. I don't know if that is a hot take.
I don't think that one is.
Again, I've been kind of out of it for the past week, but like, yeah, I think that should still be like a fact. Okay, dog, what are you doing? Anyway,
it's weird to me to suggest that Fnatic have like no coordination though, when I think that they're still very good at like catching wave low and making picks inside and playing 2 lanes. Like, I still think that they're better at that than a lot of teams globally. And it's disingenuous to say that there wasn't stuff like that in the LCS final as well, because I swear, like, Jensen was getting caught out randomly, Whippo was getting caught out randomly. We just, like, totally whiffed winning dragon scenarios as Flag West, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff like that. But the takeaway is that overall the series was worse for some reason. And I think there's just like there's like a lot of people who dislike the format right now, a lot of people who dislike the broadcast right now, a lot of people who are just like piling on a lot of EU negativity, so it's just become like a circle jerk of how to hate them. But like, in my opinion, I think there's a lot of stuff that even Fnatic do extremely well. Like, to me, it's like they set up scenarios where they can take favorable fights, and when they're playing front to back, like, G2 cannot beat them. So G2 literally just had to like play super fast on the map, so you got to see like that illustration of their play, like on a good showcase in the scenario. So I don't know. It was very strange to me that people just like disliked the final that much, and I guess for me it's like been a while since I have been this mystified by the overwhelming community sentiment being this strong, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, another thing that could be at play, which again is like intangibles and not at all reflective of like LEC gameplay, but the spectacle of the LCK Finals intro, and stuff like that, and going essentially back to back with the LEC Finals is tough. Like, if that had been LCS, we would have been eviscerated. And I did actually see some comments after our thing where people are doing like LCS is dying. I don't think it was to the level of what I have already seen of LEC. And part of that, I definitely think, to your point, is format based, and not even gameplay based either. But yeah, I think that also has something to do with it. As an aside, I'll say LCK Finals intro was really, really cool. I'm in my like practical, I tweeted this, but like I'm in my practical effects era. So I loved the intros with the flags and like actual people and the choreography with that. Obviously the augmented reality stuff was cool too, but like I'm kind of over that as a viewer. For me personally, this isn't me saying it's bad. I'm just saying for me, Emily Rand personally,
confirmed. Emily
I'm very
Rand
much over that.
Thanks, virtual reality.
I'm very much over that.
And anyone who likes it should stop being an esports fan. Anyway, continue.
Oh my god. I think it's also coming from like watching TV shows and movies too, where I'm just so over a lot of CGI stuff. But the finals intro was like so clean because it was very obviously like about these 2 teams. You know, the intros was great, and having the LEC finals in studio, not following that, but like if you're like me, you're probably going from and I had to watch TES JDG later because I had a power outage. I had to tether my phone to finish watching the LCK Finals. Like blow through my data to do it. But basically you're going from these two kind of like very spectacle driven things in LCK specifically, and then kind of also LPL. So the LEC then being in studio, obviously it's just going to be really, really tough to follow that.
See, I don't even agree, little Indian man. I don't think it's worse this year than last year. I think that last year was shit. And I think it's actually better this year. I think last year's EU was fucking terrible. I couldn't even watch it.
You're so mad.
This year, I think it's actually better because there's a lot of strategic play that is more advanced than last year. And that's why it drives me absolutely insane whenever it's like, it just gets worse every year. It's like, no, it actually got better this year. You guys are fucking delusional. Anyway, I'm good. I'm fine.
I actually agree with you. No, vitriol aside, I think LEC is looking better this year than it did at the end of last year.
I'm not being like randomly racist. That's literally the Twitch user's name is Little Indian Man. So my bad. Anyway.
I made it when I was 14. Nice.
But yeah, I'm not like also directing my ire at you in specific. It's just like it is very strange to me because I think there's like a lot more diversity this year in terms of like how EU teams play the map. And let's be real, like the mechanics of this game are not the most insane ever of like all games of all time. So if you can play to avoid scenarios and have an interesting strategy, you can for sure win a lot of games. Like absolutely. Still playing that way. And it's just been a really long time since people have talked about it. And it's more relevant now since lane swaps are coming back. And that was literally the take, right? Like, I remember in 2016, I did an analysis of which teams in EU were likely to bomb out because of the lane swaps. And I looked at the win rate of, like, Fnatic pre-lane swap patch and post-lane swap patch. And I was like, they're just going to get 3-0'd, aren't they? In playoffs. Because it was just... They were using lane swaps to get to a position in the game where they could play fights. And, I mean, that's not being bad at the game, right? That's using the resources that you have in the game to find situations to win. And arguably, like, 2015, EU teams did, like, unexpectedly well at Worlds, in part because they had the correct lane swap meta, right? They had the correct strategy. And the tradition of EU is not being, like, super mechanically sick. It's having, like, more diverse strategy. It's having, like, a developed macro sense. Like, that was historically what made EU like, a top 3 region, right? So it's interesting to me that people are suddenly like, oh, they're mechanically shitting the bed. It's like, well, that happens sometimes, you know? Like, it is what it is. Anyway, I think we've exhausted that topic. Unless you want to talk about more EU stuff, like G2 Fnatic, how they play, whatever.
No, I think we're good. I mean, I'm excited to see Fnatic at MSI. I think they are a better team than BDS. Sorry, BDS fans. And I think I'm really curious to see them like go to international competition, for as much as I just talked about how infuriating they were to me in finals with the mistakes they made. So that's the only other thing I'd add, because they in the process they qualified, right? They are the second EU team. So it could have been BDS from the championship points, and I'm glad that didn't happen, because we've had a couple times now where it's been like very dicey with championship point qualification where people have just been kind of waiting to see if and I still think this is the most egregious example of it, if a Najin Black Sword is going to happen. If people don't get that, is it because I'm a salty KT Bullets fan? Probably. I'm still mad. Anyway,
They definitely.
we should probably stop talking about this. We've definitely lost the plot if I'm talking about KTB in 2013.
We've definitely meandered into an era where we're gonna start talking about Gragas mid one tricks. Anyway. Speaking of.
Oh no.
Great Korean players of all time. LCK Finals. LCK Finals.
What a segue!
Also happened yesterday, which was very fun. We got to watch a 5-game series between T1 and Gen G, which every finals has been T1 Gen G. We saw Chovy do the 4-peats. A lot of people talking about Chovy as the greatest player right now, etc. My take is that I feel like he didn't it wasn't like he was carrying 4 corpses over the finish line. And no. I actually felt like in the early game there were like really good plays by Keen, like on Rumble, and Corky was just kind of there, for example, in game 1. Like I don't know why people picked this strat, but I feel like there's a conspiracy to increase Azir's win rate by picking Corky into it, but it is what it is. But anyway, I'm curious. Especially your take.
So just for me personally, I'm especially sad to see Chovy on Corky, not because he can't play it, but because Chovy is such a good player that I don't want to see him on Corky. I want to see him on other things, right? Yeah. So I think that's my Chovy on Corky take. But as a whole, the player I actually would really want to celebrate in this series is Keen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, like, not only did he have a really good series, and was like a key part of their wins, in my opinion. To your point, like, I actually don't even disagree that Chovy is like the best performing player, or like overall the best player in the world right now. But in terms of this series, like you said, it wasn't like he was dragging 4 corpses over the finish line. And I think Keen was actually so good across the board in the series. And also, for people that don't know, this has been such a long time coming for him. Ever since he like came up way back in the day. They had the graphic, but he's essentially finished anywhere between 10th and now first. And first, going into this finals, was the only position that he hadn't finished in. And he finally got his LCK title. And I think, again, it's been a long time coming ever since people scouted him as like one of the next great LCK tops back on Ever in 2017. Yeah, 2017. So I think that's the player that I'd like really celebrate in the series. I think overall it was an insane best of 5. There was a reason why I tethered my phone once my power went out to finish it, because it was just a really great series to watch. I also think another interesting thing from Gen G that I saw from them was a willingness to play a little bit more around Canyon as a carry, which is an interesting flexibility that this team has. I think that could be really not necessarily a key factor of them at internationals, but something where I think you still see Peanut previously on the team as someone who really wanted to help out his lanes, really was a massive shot caller. People really recognized his intangibles whenever they talked about him on the team. But then when he would go to internationals, he would kind of look comparatively lackluster at times. I think Canyon has been not only just a jungler that people like respect and recognize as someone who is really, really good and like understands jungling at a fundamentally like such a strong level. But also the ability for him to play more carry-oriented champions, I think, gives them a flexibility in draft that's really interesting going into an international tournament, especially with LPL teams, specifically more BLG in this case, in terms of the teams we're talking about going to MSI, have been more willing to play around their junglers as like more carry champions. Obviously, everyone's going to cite Milky Way as kind of like the origin of this, but I really appreciated seeing Canyon on stuff like the Viego and even the Kazakhs. Obviously, that was a super risky pick, but it ended up paying off, and I thought it was an interesting look from them. So yeah, I'm really excited to see Gen.G at internationals, and then on the T1 side, I'm glad that they recovered from the HLE series. I thought their second series against HLE really showcased their better understanding of like recognizing when they could do objectives and when they could set up for objectives, specifically Baron. I think the way that they've approached Baron and like this specific team, I remember talking about it all the way back in 2022 Worlds, like pre-show for finals, where their evolution of being such a terrible burger flipping Baron team to actually being able to sneak Barons and recognize when they could get it off of like a reset or certain specific windows between like 20 and like 22 minutes where they could kind of sneak Baron, I think has become a hallmark of this team. And we saw it in the HLE series, and then we even saw it in this Gen G series as well. So I think, yeah, people, if they haven't seen it, just generally the series, they should give it a watch because it was a really entertaining series. But then also, these are two teams that are going to be definitely two teams that people are watching out for going into MSI.
Weird. That's a hot take.
Is it?
The T1 and Gen G?
Are people saying BLG TES?
Oh no, that's being sarcastic. But yeah.
Oh, I was so confused.
Hot
I was
take
like, wait,
that
what?
T1 Gen G are teams to look out for going to MSI. You know, it's definitely a take right there.
No, how else to say it? Because it's not like like obviously they're favorites going into MSI. I'm talking more about like how they're playing. I think is
sure
what I'd want to get across. And it's a word salad finish there.
I think for me the most interesting thing is the way that like what I was looking for is like how they're generally like their mechanism. And I was thinking about it because obviously in the series where they lost to HLE, like people were very critical, or T1 lost to HLE, people were very critical of their drafts in the upper bracket. And then there was, of course, like the whole controversy that we don't really need to rehash, but yeah, it is whatever. But the loss to HLE, they're playing like these triple ADC comps, right? With like very little engage, these types of setups. And I think it's like when you actually see and a lot of disengage, and then in the final, their first comp, they had like the Senna Corki, or they had like the Poppy comp, right? With like the Senna and all of that. And it's like they're not necessarily drafting for engage, they're drafting to pull Baron and turn. Like their entire philosophy around how they're playing the game is very much like, oh, our map's fucked up, pull Baron. Our map's great, pull Baron so that we can siege better. Our maps we're really ahead, pull Baron so we can fight. We're really behind, pull Baron so that we can get a pick if they walk into a choke point. Like all of like T1's literally just the pull Baron team. And JDG, which we'll talk about later, they were the pull Baron team in LPL.
Yep.
So it's very interesting to me that it's like, because I identified this when the patch came out and the new Baron terrain was here, it's like the optimal strategy is just pull Baron. Because you have like the terrain there, you poke and all these things. So I like that T1 are playing that way, even though they get memed for it. But it's like, that is literally it. Like, whoever pulls Baron first, with a lot of the way that the Baron is set up now, should just win whatever ensuing fight, as long as you're clear on whether you're turning or finishing, right? You should, as long as you're very clear on that call, you should win whatever fight by pulling first, because they have to walk through a choke to get to you. And then T1 are really abusing that, right? And it's good to see. I think the interesting thing for me about Gen G is that they're when I watch Genji and G2 macro and mid game, it's actually very similar. To in the sense that they play like really fast side lane transitions. The differences are for Genji, they try to give Chovy both waves in many circumstances, which slows down their rotations, and I think it's like potentially abusable. The one thing that I think both of them have, Emily apparently agrees.
I think
with my
I
point.
just can't play with the pen anymore because it thinks I'm giving a thumbs up.
Emily really likes my point, and I will therefore take it as an endorsement to keep talking. The other thing, like Genji will almost always hover mid before they go to side lane, and that's another thing that like kind of slows down their rotations. So I think that that's an interesting thing, and I want to see if like there will be teams who abuse it, and that's why I talked about Fnatic, because I think the fact that Fnatic always catch low, and they look for picks inside after catching low could be something that catch Genji off guard for a game. So that's like a matchup that I would find unexpectedly interesting, even if I think Genji would ultimately win. So there's like, those are kind of how I'm characterizing these teams in my head. I also think super underrated from Genji is Lehens, and how he like gets map vision and how he's like ahead of supports very frequently. I think Carry has like the creative picks and like almost solo won game 1 with like the Poppy. But like Lehens, in terms of just like taking space and operating on the map, has actually been played very well. So yeah. That's like my feeling on those two teams. But I think, yeah, I think there is a lot of good things that can come from the way T1 play, and I think that on a good day, like T1's willingness to just pull Baron could have won this series as well, right? So, and I think that that's like what makes. That's also probably another thing that went in the disfavor of G2 versus Fnatic, whereas it didn't feel like on a given day Fnatic could win, right? Whereas it felt like on a given day T1 could have won, which gave the series a lot more parity. Do I think that they're favored versus LPL teams? I think it's a very interesting one, because I think like a given draft, any of like the top 4 teams could have like an advantageous situation to win a game. So yeah, like BLG, TS, Jeju, or T1.
I would agree with that.
I know a lot of people think LPL sucks, so it's another one. Is Chovy the best player in the world, Emily, right now?
Sure.
Interesting.
I'm trying to think of who would be better. I guess people would be citing Knight. I think the really weird thing about, like, for as good as Chovy has been consistently, it's very bizarre to me that people are still comparatively low on him, and I think it literally is only due to international performance and like not even his international performance. And I see something very similar with Knight, by the way. This is not exclusive to Chovy, but like not his individual international performance, but his team's international performance.
I mean,
which I think is
yes,
kind of specious.
but I would also say it's very invalid to say that he hasn't had some really weird games individually on the international stage, and that he doesn't.
Oh no, he has.
That he doesn't default to bad habits. Like he's made. I think at this point he's been at. He's only made it past Worlds quarters once. Is that accurate, or am I wrong on that one?
Confusing it with MSI.
I know he did in 2022. That was like when he made it past Worlds quarters. I can't remember what happened last year with Genji. They lost in semis.
BLG
right?
beat them.
Yeah. So twice.
Yeah. I think so I don't disagree that he defaults to bad habits, and those bad habits being like AFK, essentially AFK farming on the map, right? Where that's been the heaviest point of criticism levied at him over the years.
Yeah.
And even the thing that initially, when people were so high on him, when he was on Griffin, that was actually the thing that knocked him down a bit in my estimation compared to other mids. Is I was like, yes, he understands the 1v1 matchups, right? Like he has incredible mechanics.
I know he did lose,
but he doesn't understand. Yeah, and this is like way back in the Griffin days. I think he's evolved so much since then, but like he doesn't back then I would think he doesn't understand like how to play mid lane as the pressure point that it is outside of laning, very specific like narrow laning focus. And that's not who the player he is now. But the shades of that player are sometimes what you see if he I don't want to say panics, but like if he feels like the pressure is solely on him to carry a game because his team is in a disadvantageous position internationally. I think we have seen shades of that. But I still think the argument against Chovy, people will literally just point out team finishes as reasons why he quote unquote sucks internationally. And I also think that's a really specious argument that shouldn't be used without looking at his actual gameplay.
And I think it's
and again, I think it's an argument that's also been used against Knight in a very similar way.
I think it's fine to call him the best player in the world. I think for me, it's just like Faker's still playing the game and still having like insane performances. Like even in that series, Faker had game-winning performances, right? Like it's very difficult.
That Azir play in the game they lost was still so fucking good.
It was very good, right? So it's like very hard for me to call Chovy the best player in the world when like Faker exists and is still playing at the highest level ever. Well, not the highest level ever. Is still playing like an insanely high level. Still has his legacy. Still performing top. Still probably his shot calling and probably the way that his team plays the map is like in large part down to him, based on testimonials. So, like based on all of these things.
Also, last summer when he was not playing.
Yeah, exactly.
And what the team looked like.
Based on all of that, it's like very hard for me to ever say another player is the best player in the world until like he starts to look like a complete handless idiot. So yeah, I mean that's the thing for me. I do think Chovy does have very good individual performances, but it was interesting to me that everyone, I guess like in the AHLE series it made more sense. But like it's interesting to me that people basically just said like, oh, Chovy wants to win, Chovy's so insane, when I felt like Keen was the finals MVP. Was basically why I brought the comment up. I do think he's a very good player. I do still have low expectations of him individually at MSI because I just like until it changes, you know, in terms of his individual performances, I'm still having like relatively low expectations of him at MSI. Knight as well, in fairness. I think Knight had like an insane pop-off game in the BLG TS series, but otherwise he has been very underwhelming this playoffs, actually. So I wouldn't even bring up Knight as a competitor to Chovy right now. Even though I had him as my regular season MVP. It's interesting. Though I will say something that goes under the radar is 369 is also up for the 4-peat.
True. My boy.
Yeah.
I love 369.
369
for people that don't know, already know, and haven't listened to me for the past like since 2017 or something. I don't know. When did he come up? 2018, I think. 2017.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah. Demacia Cup, end of the year. I think
it was 2017.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. Like I said, I have them winning. We'll see. Obviously, BLG have looked very good in fights, and I think a lot of that is down to Bin. Like I think those top laners are very good. Yeah. So I think been an on though on like with the controversy because he went to see his girlfriend, so you know stonks.
What?
There was this drama because he went to spend 3 days with his girlfriend after they qualified for MSI, and so
Oh.
everyone was very upset because obviously he should be practicing very hard to win the grand final and not be going to see his girlfriend for 3 days. So, you know, obviously, if BLG lose now, it's because On went to visit his girlfriend.
It's because On went to see his girlfriend, yeah.
clearly.
Or if On performs super well,
Yeah,
then it's girlfriend buff.
true. See, Emily, you should have thought of that before you predicted BLG to win the grand final. You know, like the.
I know. I did not factor in On visiting his girlfriend into
visiting his
my
girlfriend.
predictions.
Exactly. So yeah, that's a fun one. But I think that'll be interesting. I think we can transition into talking about JDG. I think Chovy is definitely one of the best players in the world. So don't get me wrong. I just thought it was like very interesting that that was the reaction to the final.
People again, like I think it's like mechanics versus, and then you get into these arguments with like stuff that is just difficult to see.
Yeah.
But there's like some insane stat of like how many LCK finals since the LCK has existed, even going back to OGN Champions, which was the original LCK. The LCK literally owes OGN Champions its existence. How many finals Faker has been to, and it's just insane. Like it's actually nuts that we
really
have a player like this.
Like if you, the problem is like if you value results at all. It was funny because I made a meme tweet about like Faker who because Rookie was like popping the fuck off in one of the series, and of course it pissed off all the T1 fans, even though it was a joke. But it was like the main, like all the responses were pictures of Faker with his trophies, and it's like, yeah, sure, like there is no argument against that. I know, like even if I were trying to make a serious argument of Rookie being like better than Faker, which there were times this split where you could have made that argument, especially in playoffs. But it was like, yeah, there's not really one. And it's funny to me because those same people will then say like Chovy's the GOAT, but Chovy has no titles either. So I'm he obviously has LCK titles, but he doesn't have Worlds titles. Would be the counter argument. So it's very interesting to me because obviously it's not the same people making the argument there, but yeah. I just think it's like very difficult to argue Faker if like you're talking about any sort of titles or accomplishments.
Best of, yeah.
All right. Even though he did not win this week, so there's that. Yes. But we can talk about LPL a bit. Moving on, I think. Yeah, I had JDG pretty low going into playoffs. I did think that they would beat their first round pretty decisively. I thought that TS would end draft, and then TS would make it a lower bracket run, and JDG would like instantly lose their next lower bracket games. But JDG dropping out, I think, is probably very confusing for people who don't watch a lot of LPL. And even if you do watch a lot of LPL, like understanding why JDG are worse is probably confusing. So I guess what's your take on why JDG went from being one of the most domestically dominant teams last year with a mid lane change to kind of limping into top 3, so to speak, this year?
It's also a top lane change.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this JDG as a whole, last year when I thought of JDG and when I thought of like, okay, if they, don't get the early game, like if they don't have a good early game, right? Like their 5v5 team fighting is still so good that and again, I think for as much as people and obviously like I'm a huge apologist, so sure you can call me out for that, but I think one thing that 369 has brought to his teams recently has been just a really, really strong understanding of how to team fight as a top laner in 5v5s, just generally, regardless of like what champion he's playing. And I think he is continuing that in returning to top esports, but I also think it's something he brought to JDG as well. This is not to like dunk on Flandra, I think has been an innovator for a lot of his career, but yeah, I think the top lane situation where they obviously would at some point want to bring in Sheer, but then ended up going with Flandre for playoffs. And then, as much as I love Yagao, I think, again, it's kind of surprising to me that he has been going on this long and can still play to this level as well. From going like from going to being,
the way
you
he
know,
said it
this
was like, I'm surprised he's still alive now. No.
no, oh my god. But like just when I think like it's like, oh okay, like he's definitely done after this year, he doesn't have the mechanics or whatever. He gets picked up and does like surprisingly well in a team environment, right? Like I'm not saying he's lighting the world on fire with his mechanical plays. In fact, I think people have compiled like low light reels of Yagao plays from this split. But I also think it hasn't necessarily been like a massive factor in a lot of their losses. So it's funny to see those, but I also don't think you can argue that he's like the reason why this team is lost. Maybe people are making that argument. I don't know if they are.
I actually think he got stepped up a lot in playoffs, and several times when I was co-streaming, I said he is the best performing player on the team. And there were several games where he was the best performing player on the team, and it was usually Azir or any games. But there was still like mini games where Yagao was playing way better than the rest of his teammates. So I don't think it's like fair to say that the mechanical, whereas like I think Knight has had a comparatively okay playoffs, right? He didn't have a bad playoffs. He had some really good games in the TS BLG series. Whereas Yagao like stood out as a very strong performer on his team. I think the point about top lane is very valid because I think JDG were in an awkward position where both of their top laners had very specific pools that were very telegraphed and easy to read, right? Within like a couple of regular series games against Sheer, everyone was banning Jax Cassante, right? Against Flandre, the strategy that TS had was, we know that if we deny TF, they will have to pick Rek'Sai basically on 1-2-3. So we'll prepare counter picks to Rek'Sai. That's why they brought out the Urgot. So it's very easy to read and understand what JDG are going to play. I also think the meta for Ruler's champ pool isn't quite there. He's not like a Jinx player as much. His area was very lackluster. It really felt like the Zyra Khan or nothing kind of situation. Obviously, like his Varus is good, his Lucian was good, but those were like permabans, and then it's like, okay, what are we playing here? Zeri looks good, and then they just like kept tunnel visioning on the Zeri even when it didn't work out for them. So yeah, I made the joke of like TS are just not gonna ban Rakan, Zyra Khan, and they're gonna play it all three games in 3-0. Luckily that didn't happen. TS banned Rakan every game, so good times. Yeah, it was definitely like, it feels like they're just very limited in what works for them right now, and I think anyone who's like attributing that to Yagao specifically is a bit delusional. So I think it just like ended up being that this year's bot lane meta and top lane meta is just like not working out for them. I think what will end
Yeah.
up happening is by the end of the season, Sheer will be like the main starter, and he'll have a more developed pool. That's like kind of my prediction for JDG. So we'll see.
Yeah. And I mean, I hope it happens because I think Sheer is a really good prospect. And I also don't disagree with the idea of like conceptually, obviously, I'm sure they both want to start, and having any sort of rotating roster is always like juggling like player development versus ego and the fact that both players want to play. But having someone like Flandra who does know so much about the game and like has been previously a major innovator in LPL, especially when he was like a lot younger, that's a good player to learn from if you are, you know, an 18-year-old rookie player. So I think the setup is good, provided that they can like guide Sheer into opening up his champion pool and then also just understanding a little bit more of the intricacies of like team fighting and side laning and just stuff that you learn as an LPL top as opposed to an LDL top. Or yeah.
The real narrative
I almost said LSPL, but that's old.
Real narrative is that Kanavi and Ruler hate each other, and we're wrong.
Yeah, so. Apparently, based on body language or something. I don't even know. I
could tell Linda was so mad on Twitter.
Yeah, I didn't even know this was happening until Linda like did the subtweet, and I was like, okay, what is this even about? Yeah. I'm so confused.
Apparently, Ruler walked away in disgust. Anyway, but yeah.
Couldn't people say that about like if a body language expert studied TL, because APA, regardless of win or loss, always just like sprints off stage? Like, yeah. I never know if it's because he really has to pee or something, but like that man is gone during a series. He is focused, like he's dialed in.
There's always something, right, that people will speculate on, just like on what you're doing. Yeah. And the best you can do is just like laugh about it, you know? Like it is what it is.
Never forget the Ning the Shy 2019 era.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I'll say. That got really wild.
Oh, yeah. Someone was making, like, one of the Spanish casters was making a joke about, like, as a meme about Scout not liking the smell of Weiwei's feet or something, like, as a joke. But unironically, there was that rumor in 2015 that Dade disliked the smell of one of the junglers. And I was like, I thought he was referencing that.
Oh god, people are crazy. Interesting. But, like,
people will just like make shit up all the time. It's amazing.
Oh, that's insane. All right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, that's fun.
Anyway, welcome, veteran raiders. We're almost done with the show anyway. But apparently, Ruddy did well.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Congrats.
2019. Why do I join? And here's 2019 IG Emily. Why? All right.
It's gonna follow us for the rest of time.
For the rest of all time. So anyway, JDG didn't succeed. I think it is not you guys' fault. But we will have TS BLG Finals, and hopefully Emily will join the co-stream for that one. She's already said she's down. So
I was going to join this weekend, but then my power
went
out. So cross your fingers so we don't have another power outage.
And Emily is currently the analyst co-streamer bracket prediction leader right now. So she has...
this is the first time that's ever happened. Usually I run it down hard.
She has BLG winning, I have TES winning, so we'll hopefully have a good time, like, rooting for our opponent teams. Though, of course, to quote Noam Chomsky,
I will defend BLG to the death, despite the fact that I actually think TES are in a better position to win.
Wow.
It's fine.
You're already flopping.
It's fine.
Already flopping.
No, I'm not flopping. They are gonna come out with an early game so stompy, and they're gonna deal the lane swap so well that it's gonna be insane. They're gonna set up crazy dives. It's gonna be great.
And Elk and Mako will not int and give a double kill trying to 2v2 dive. That will not excuse me, On and Elk will not int.
Elk and On, yeah.
That will not happen. Also, like, from my perspective as a TES rooter for, in this case, that's the worst way to say that possible. Anyway.
Amazing.
We will not pick Corki. We will not blind Draven on 1-2. We will absolutely...
Yeah, we will permaban Senna.
Yeah.
As well. Jackie Love, you're not getting Senna. And unironically, Jackie Love is actually so good on Senna. I think he really understands how to play that champ. It's insane.
I keep saying Jackie Love is like due for Jackie Love moments because he had like so few this year so far. So it's
he's had a really good year.
It's it's gonna happen.
It's making me nervous.
It's like it's gonna be fucking game 5 and they're gonna throw at Nexus. Anyway. Oh, good times. I think Jackie Love slam the Jackie Love Ezreal or Cog. I mean, Cog could definitely be on the radar. Like, for sure, Cog is a potential factor. Jackie Love has always been a good Cog.
In all seriousness, if TES do want to opt into a lane swap, because I think BLG's early game is such a strong component of like how they win. If TES do want to just pick something like Cog, swap away from it, that's a pretty good strategy for them.
Yep. And they already did it once against BLG. BLG matched.
Yep.
But it works. I think TS's like mid game is very good. I think it's like up there with G2 Gen G, who I think like had the best mid game macro. So we'll see. I think it'll be fun for sure because I think BLG has also gotten a lot better. Like, I remember I think it was like the TT series. I was like, this is the most cursed shit I've ever seen in my entire life. But they won those games anyway. And I think their side wave management has improved. Though, you would argue that if you just nair ram against Gen G, they could do the best shot because they'll always hover mids. You can always catch Chovy hovering mid on timer because Pays will int if you don't hover mid. So
true.
Good.
I think another thing that is in BLG's favor that we kind of saw at MSI last year, and since it's the same team, we haven't seen as much of it because there's still been other potentially more optimal like laning options that we've seen them go with, like the Varus or the Callista. But BLG, one of their hallmarks, I think, in their MSI success last year was that they really understood how to play Jinx comps with Elk.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought their understanding of like, not just, Elk is a good Jinx player, but like what they needed to have to support the Jinx in a 5v5 and like how they wanted to play out those 5v5s was actually really, really smart. So, and definitely they had a stronger understanding of that than most other teams at the tournament. And it was behind their run to eventually JDG inevitably beating them in the finals. But I think that's another thing that will be really interesting to see from BLG is if they start just defaulting to that kind of play style as well, because I think it's one that suits them.
Yeah, I think Bin and On are like what makes BLG win games is first their early game planning is really good, and two, their team fighting is really good. Their team fighting is really good in my opinion because On and Bin are like the best frontlining duo in the LPL in terms of like how easy they make it for Elk to free hit, which is why everyone was like, why wasn't Elk in your all-pro, Kelsey? Isn't Elk insane? I was like, no, because it's like so easy to play AD on BLG, right?
Another thing I will bring up, and obviously we'll be seeing them go up against each other yet again, Bin versus 369. Yep. One of the things I had previously, until like last year, harped on Bin for was like, okay, how are you going to end up evolving from, once again, this top laner that can play your lane really well into like a more fully fleshed out top laner that understands team fighting and the map a lot better. It happened with 369, more famously after like that whole altercation with Karsa. But it's also happened with Bin. I think Bin has also followed that trajectory. So it's really cool to see them meet in another finals. I think Bin versus 369 is always a banger. So
yeah, I think they're definitely not just like the carry brain off players. They're more dimensional both. I brought this up because I think it was like you who posted the clip of the coach telling Bin that like with you we could win. You know, we could do better. Like you could play Ornn, you could play these tops if you had like a better pool. Like that clip.
yep.
My argument is that if last year's roster, if you had been playing like a tank, you're gonna lose the game. So because you need someone to carry and someone to like come up in these clutch moments, and now they have Knights who the last time TS and BLG played against each other, it was literally Knight clutching out the series. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting matchup. I'm excited. I think Cream has done well. One of my favorite Chinese memes is like a reference to like the Chinese students like overworking themselves, and they use they use Cream as a meme where it's like, oh look, Cream, all of your teammates have won before. Like, shouldn't you be one more Azir game, Cream? One more Azir game, Cream. Don't you don't go to bed now, Cream. You have to put in more work. Like all of these jokes because like Cream is kind of the rookie of the bunch or the less experienced of the bunch. He's never been in a final before. All these things, but from that perspective, like his story is very good because he has been like a Hui player. He's been like a mage player. He was like kind of the Zeka of last year in terms of like his champ pool and all these things, but he's shown a lot more dimension. So I think that's like a very exciting storyline to follow as well. Like Cream versus Knights in the final. It'll be a fun one. So
no, I know people are like kind of disappointed about JDG, but I'm actually really happy this TES roster is going to MSI. Like I think they're super interesting. Like obviously we've been talking about them a lot and this episode has gone on long, but like TN as well is someone that I was kind of surprised didn't retire, if only because he had physical injuries, and then additionally like self-admitted like mental health issues at one point in his career, and he got really really worn down. And so to see him doing so well on this roster and like again just really understanding like where he needs to be, he I don't necessarily want to call it a return to form because I think he's kind of always played this way, but apparently the dog disagrees. It's been really nice to see him on this team as well because I think he, it's a very symbiotic relationship between him and his lanes. And I additionally think that Kareem has benefited from having a jungler like Tien who is so experienced and who knows where to be. So.
Yeah, so confirmed your dog is a Fnatic fan and hates Tien. Probably because...
yeah, apparently.
Probably
yeah, he's still bitter about it.
The 2020 Fnatic TES series is still like painful for him, you know? So it's fine.
He's apparently going through it in his head right now.
So I don't know, like Tien's story is obviously great. I've been pretty high on Tien. Like I think mechanically he's been playing very well, even though I don't rate his pathing as well as like Konavi, for example. So I think he's had a very good season. And Jackie Love has had a very good season, and Mako has had a very good season, and 369, it's like everyone on TES has had an insane season. Pretty much everyone on BLG has had an insane season. Like, absolutely, if you look at all the tape and every single LPL game that's been played this split, which I have, then, like, 100% TS and BLG should be the teams that go to MSI. Like, there's no question for me. Like, I know we talked about this before, but it's like 100%. Both you and I had them in the final. Both you and I had them going, so I am glad that they are going. Yep.
Same.
All right. Anyway, thanks so much, guys. You guys are, if you're here from the veteran stream, thanks for coming in. We talked about
Thank you.
LEC early, and we think your region is a lot better than Twitter does. So, thank you. You can go through the chat and check that out. Otherwise, we will find someone to raid and pay it forward. So let's see.